of blood flow between a resting state and an exercising state. Okay. At rest, somewhere around 15 to 20% of your blood flow is going to your skeletal muscles, and during exercise it can go anywhere up to about 85%, depending on the type and the intensity and the length and all that kind of information. All right? So the way that blood flow is redirected is by vasodilation, which is dilating the blood vessels. All right, so I'm going to increase the radius of the blood vessel. That decreases the resistance to flow, and so we get more blood flow to the working muscle. Right? So in order to do the vasodilation and to move the blood to the muscle tissue, we have to vasoconstrict. We have to decrease the radius of the vessels that are leading to the stomach and the kidneys, so that we decrease the radius, we increase the resistance, and then it's easier to move the blood where we want it to go. All right? So that vasodilation, vasoconstriction is under the command of the sympathetic nervous system. Right? And the sympathetic nervous system will stimulate the release of norepinephrine and epinephrine. Norepinephrine is responsible for, I think it's the constriction, and the epinephrine does both. So one of the things is when we get the vasodilation, the sympathetic system is turned down a little bit, all right? So that the constriction is kind of turned off. Okay. So remember, our sympathetic system is our fight or flight one. So it makes sense then that it's the one that's responsible for this, because I need more blood flow to my muscles if I'm going to fight or I'm going to run away. Okay? So we mentioned the fact that Q increases as we exercise more, right? Resting Q is pretty much the same for everybody, give or take size, okay? But when we start to exercise, the role of Q is to provide oxygen to the working muscles. Okay, so we see these large increases in Q as heart rate goes up and stroke volume goes up. Okay? Well, if you think about it, how do we get, if I'm going to squeeze more blood out of the heart, I have to have more blood coming back to the heart. Does that make sense? Okay? And so there are a couple of mechanisms that are responsible for increasing blood flow back to the heart. The first one that kind of underpins these is the fact that the veins act like a reservoir, right? When you're at rest, about 65% of your blood volume, so a bit more than half of your blood volume, is sitting in your veins, and they can stretch and they act like a reservoir, and it's just sitting there. It's one of the reasons why if you sit down for a long time or you stand for a long time, you get that pooling and your ankles and your feet swell. All right? So we've got this kind of reservoir of spare blood that we don't need to maintain a resting state. And when we start to exercise then, we have to kind of ramp up moving that blood from the reservoir back to the heart. So the first mechanism is venoconstriction. That's specifically constriction of the veins. Okay? Again, it's stimulated by the sympathetic nervous system, by our fight or flight. Okay? And it constricts any veins that are coming from organs other than muscles, right? Because we're dilating everything else. Okay? All right? And the next one is what we call the muscle pump. So the muscle pump is the reason why when you're on a long air flight, they tell you it's okay to get up and move around and you should be like circling your feet and doing things like that. When I first started coming to the States, you could move anywhere on the plane. I used to sit at the back of the plane and do yoga and stretching because the chairs were so uncomfortable. I used to spend the whole flight sitting on the floor at the back of the plane. Then they had this big kind of safety thing, and they made everybody sit in their seats, and you weren't allowed, literally, you had to ask permission to go to the loo. I mean, it was ridiculous. You had to sit in your seat for the entire flight, which is not comfortable for 10 hours, right? So the problem with that period of time was that on really long flights, like flights to Australia, several people died because they developed blood clots that were not, they developed blood clots by sitting still for so long, and then when they got off the plane and started moving around, the blood clot moved to their heart or to their brain and they had a heart attack or a stroke. So we're back to you're allowed to move around quite a bit, and some airlines give little videos where they give you kind of seated things that you should do to keep your blood moving around. So when you look at, and the diagram here is in the cuff, in the gastrocnemius, when you look at how the vein is constructed, it has a valve, a flap in it. And so when we're doing rhythmical movement and the muscles are squeezing, then they squeeze blood out of the vein, and the flap prevents the blood from coming back down into the legs and the feet. So we have this, what they call a muscle pump, but it's in conjunction with this one-way valve that's in the vein. So the more I do ankle raises and ankle circles and things like that, the more I've got this rhythmical contraction of the muscles, and the more blood is moved from the veins up towards the heart, and it can't flow back because of the valve. Okay, does that make sense? So this diagram is not clear. You know, I think it's because of cobwebs. And you know what? There's a great big scratch on that. I think that's why. This diagram is in the book. It's a really nice visual, I think, to explain how that muscle pump works. And then the third mechanism that helps to move more blood back towards the heart is a respiratory pump. And that's less of the, it's less of a contraction type idea and more of a change in pressure. So as I breathe harder, we are changing the pressure in the thoracic cavity, decreasing and increasing the pressure as we breathe, which we'll go through in the next chapter. And that forces blood, as the pressure increases, it forces blood out of this area and back towards the heart. All right, so the respiratory pump, the harder we work, the deeper we breathe, the faster we breathe, and so that gets enhanced and adds to our additional blood flow back to the heart, so that then I've got more blood there, I can squeeze more blood out, and we have higher Q. So everything kind of loops together. Okay. So, resistance work does help cardiac health, cardiovascular health. Aerobic work is really the number one item that we're interested in when we're looking at trying to keep that poor old heart healthy, okay? And the adaptations that we see in response to doing aerobic physical activity over time, if I can be consistent over time, then some of those adaptations play a significant role in decreasing your risk for coronary artery disease and other cardiovascular diseases, all right? So there are several options in the book. There's a couple of tables that talk about, we looked briefly on Wednesday at the table that showed the resting adaptations, all right? But they also have these charts, which I think are quite useful. The green lines on the charts are the untrained people, and the orange line is the aerobically trained, aerobically physically active person, all right? So if you're good with graphs, if that visual helps, then we've got one that looks at heart rate and VO2 max, all right? So they're quite linearly, as I work harder, my heart rate increases, right? If I'm training, I work harder, my heart rate increases, but my heart rate is less for any particular workload, all right? So I find the graphs quite helpful, but I was reasonably good at maths, right? If you don't find the graphs helpful, don't spend time looking at them and getting confused. That's a waste of your time. You've got better things to use that time for within the chapter, all right? This one is stroke volume. So remember we said that stroke volume increases and then plateaus, okay? So stroke volume increases and plateaus, and if I'm trained, my stroke volume is going to be higher because of the change in the EDV and the ESV, but it's still going to plateau. I just have more blood coming out per squeeze than if I'm not trained. Right? So as I said, I think the graphs are very useful, but they're only useful if you can look at them and use that information to help you interpret adaptations. All right? The key point with adaptations is they are typically positive. Right? Most adaptations occur in response to stressing the system to allow you to manage that stress and perform more efficiently. Right? That's why we have to add extra weight or add extra time to the run or run faster. Right? Because if I do the same thing every day for 6 months, I don't continue to do better. Right? 'Cause once we've done the adaptation to the stress, then we have to stress the system even more to continue to see adaptation. So our overload principle, our continued adding on extra weight, adding on extra mileage, is because we have to keep stressing the system if we want to see improvement. Okay. As I said, the graphs are on the exam, but the graphs might help you pull together the adaptations if you don't want to deal with the words and the lists. So use the tool that works best for you so that you understand the adaptation. And I think if you understand the system and you understand what the system is doing, then the adaptations are logical, because they are things that have to happen in the system for it to get better. Right? So you shouldn't have to spend heaps of time memorizing adaptations if you know what is going on with the system at rest and when we exercise. In my view. But that's easy for me to say because this is the 26th semester I have taught this class. Right? So the adaptations make sense to me now. Okay? So I think that's really all I had to say today. We've got Chapter 7 to tackle when we get back from spring break. So we will look at the respiratory system, and then we will have exam number 3. Okay? I don't want people to spend their whole spring break doing schoolwork. You need a break. I need a break. You need a break. But I would recommend that Friday, Saturday, Sunday, towards the end of the week, coming back into school, that you take half an hour to review this chapter before we jump into the next one. Because that whole week, it's all going to go, right? And then we'll come back and you'll be going, oh yeah, I don't remember what that was, right?
So will you open up your chapter quiz on Sunday?
Yes. I believe it's opening. I get these two classes muddled up. One of them is opening at 6 o'clock on Sunday morning. I can't remember if it's this class. Ooh.